For most people, sex is about desire, connection, maybe even love. For the Spartans, it was none of these. It was an order, a civic command enforced by the state, meant for one single purpose, to manufacture the deadliest warriors the ancient world had ever known. Spartans weren't raised as individuals. They were engineered as weapons. And their creation didn't begin on the battlefield, it began in the bedroom. Forget the myth of crimson cloaks and heroic speeches. Behind the legend of the 300 lies a disturbing truth, a cold, calculated system of human engineering so merciless it makes the bleakest dystopias look forgiving. At its center was absolute control over reproduction. In Sparta, love and personal choice meant nothing. The government decided who could marry whom, pairing citizens not by affection but by strength. Elderly magistrates, men hardened by decades of war, inspected young citizens like livestock, judging height, stamina, and lineage. The chosen man was tall and broad, his bloodline decorated with past warriors. The chosen woman was strong, fertile, wide-hipped, her body built for childbearing. Beauty had no place as vanity, it was simply evidence of good health. Marriages were cold, strategic unions designed to produce superior offspring. Love was irrelevant. Desire optional. The body no longer belonged to the self, it belonged to Sparta. Every citizen's duty was to strengthen the state through their bloodline. Women were no exception. They weren't viewed as wives or mothers in the way we understand them today, but as vessels of the Spartan nation. Their worth was measured by their ability to bear strong, healthy children. From childhood, girls trained not for battle, but for childbirth. They ran, wrestled, and hurled javelins, not to fight, but to prepare their bodies for motherhood. Their will didn't matter. Their bodies did. They were told that their battlefield was the birthing bed, and their greatest honor was to bring forth a future soldier. But Sparta's obsession went even further, into territory that today feels monstrous. What happened when a warrior's wife couldn't conceive? Or when she birthed weak children? What if another woman, strong and healthy, was married to a man past his prime? Sparta had an answer, a chilling clause in its social code. It allowed, even encouraged, a powerful soldier to father a child with another man's wife. It wasn't adultery. It was duty. A woman's womb could be loaned in service of the state, and her husband would often agree. Producing a strong child, no matter who the father was, brought honor to the household, and to Sparta itself. Love, fidelity, and family were secondary to one thing, perfection of the bloodline. When a child was finally born, it wasn't a moment of joy. It was a test. The newborn wasn't placed in its mother's arms but carried to a grim place called the Lesche, the gathering hall. There, a council of battle-scarred elders, the Gerousia, examined each infant in silence. They studied its limbs, spine, and cry. Any flaw, any weakness, could decide its fate. To Spartan minds, this wasn't cruelty, it was logic. They lived surrounded by enemies and an enslaved class that outnumbered them 10-1. Weakness was a threat not only to the child but to the entire state. Mercy today could mean destruction tomorrow. If the baby passed inspection, it was returned to its parents, not as their child, but as property of Sparta. Its life already belonged to the state. If it failed, there was no ceremony, no farewell. The infant was taken to the barren slopes of Mount Taygetus, to a place called the Apothetai, the deposits. There, left in the cold night, it was abandoned to the wind, the frost, and the beasts. To the Spartans, this wasn't murder. It was nature correcting itself. Passing this first test was only the beginning. From that moment, the child's life became a slow, deliberate march toward war. Even his parents' duty didn't end at birth. The state demanded more, constant creation of new bodies to feed the war machine. Procreation wasn't a privilege. It was an obligation. Sparta practiced eugenics long before the word existed, the belief that humanity could be perfected through selective breeding. This ideology wasn't born in 20th century labs. It was forged on these rocky hills. But for the Spartans, it wasn't hatred that drove it, it was survival. The most private human act had become a public duty. Love had no place in the formula. Men lived communally from age 7 to 30. Husbands would sneak home under the cover of darkness, lie briefly with their wives, then vanish before dawn. There was no domestic life, no shared mornings. The wife was a stranger chosen for her body, not her heart. Their meeting served one purpose: conception. Even marriage itself was engineered to suppress emotion. During the ceremony, the groom didn't court the bride, he abducted her. Her attendants shaved her head, dressed her in a man's cloak and sandals, and left her alone in the dark on a bed of straw. He came secretly, fulfilled his duty, and left before sunrise. It was not romance. It was reproduction by design. And if a man refused to marry or produce children, the state humiliated him. During festivals, bachelors were paraded naked through the streets in winter, mocked as failures who had abandoned their civic duty. Private life simply didn't exist. The result of this ideology was devastating. Compassion faded. Generation after generation grew up believing tenderness was weakness. Bodies belonged to the state. Mothers were praised not for love, but for loyalty. Children didn't learn affection, they learned obedience. At age 7, boys were taken from their homes and handed over to the state. Mothers would whisper only, "Return with your shield," or "on it." That phrase wasn't poetic. It was literal. This was the beginning of the agoge, the most brutal training system humanity has ever devised. Picture it: you are 7, ripped from your home. Your new family is a barracks full of boys. Your father is now an instructor. Your bed is a mat of reeds you cut yourself, without a knife. You own one rough tunic, the same for blazing summers and freezing winters. And above all, you are always hungry. The rations were meager by design. Hunger sharpened instincts. The boys were told to steal food, not for greed, but to learn stealth and cunning. If caught, they were whipped, not for stealing, but for being caught. The lesson was simple: success excuses everything, failure excuses nothing. They learned that hesitation was death, and weakness was contagious. The agoge didn't just harden bodies. It rewired minds. Comfort was the enemy. Emotion was a defect. The boys learned to lie, to endure, to obey. They were taught that right and wrong didn't matter, only results did. They learned to talk like diplomats and fight like predators. Even speech was weaponized. Our word, laconic, meaning short and cutting, comes from Laconia, the land of Sparta. Children were taught that words were tools, not toys. Speaking foolishly invited punishment. Instructors hurled questions that demanded sharp answers. A single hesitation could earn a bite to the hand, a small but unforgettable lesson in thinking before speaking. Silence became armor. Words were to strike like arrows. But cruelty didn't only come from teachers. Older boys ruled over younger ones with unchecked authority. At meals they would launch verbal traps: "Who is the bravest man in Sparta? What do you think of the king's last battle?" And there were no safe answers. Humiliation and pain were constant companions. This wasn't bullying, it was indoctrination, a system designed to breed composure under chaos. Then came the altar of Artemis Orthia, a ritual soaked in blood. Cheeses were placed on the goddess's altar. Boys had to seize them while men lashed them with whips. Many died doing so, smiling through their agony, proud to have proven themselves unbreakable. This was their final test: to bleed in silence, to die without a scream. It was not training anymore. It was transformation. Boys became soldiers, soldiers became predators. But when a society burns away every weakness, what happens to what makes us human? Sparta built men of iron, but hollowed their souls. They could kill without hesitation, obey without question, and die without fear. And the state found a use for that kind of loyalty: a secret order known as the Cryptia. These were elite graduates sent into the countryside with only a dagger, ordered to kill under cover of darkness. Their victims were not foreign enemies, but the enslaved helots, anyone who showed courage, strength, or leadership. Each year, Sparta's rulers declared a ceremonial war on the helots so their killings wouldn't count as murder. It was psychological warfare, terror as population control. By the time a Spartan completed this grim ritual, he was fully transformed, not just a soldier, but an instrument of the state's will. At 30, he could finally leave the barracks, marry, and start a household, though his life was no freer than before. His duty now was to reproduce. Spartan women, meanwhile, were not victims. They were the system's foundation. They trained their bodies to bear strong sons and managed estates while men were at war. They were educated, disciplined, and fiercely loyal to the state. In most of Greece, women were hidden. In Sparta, they were honored, not for love, but for their contribution to the war machine. When mothers handed their sons their shields, they said, "Return with it or upon it." It wasn't bravado, it was the creed of a society that valued victory over life itself. For centuries, the system worked. Sparta dominated Greece. Its warriors were unmatched. But the same perfection that made them strong also doomed them. Their ruthless breeding laws created a dangerously small population. Every warrior lost in battle was irreplaceable. Their narrow bloodlines became their downfall. They had forged an army too perfect to survive its own success. The second flaw was rigidity. The Agoge trained followers, not thinkers. Sparta produced flawless soldiers, but few leaders. When warfare evolved, they couldn't adapt. Innovation crushed tradition. And the final blow came with victory. After defeating Athens, wealth flooded into Sparta. Gold corroded what iron discipline had built. Greed replaced equality. When Theban general Epaminondas struck at Leuctra, Sparta's army collapsed. Its king fell in battle, its myth shattered. What had once been the most feared military power in Greece became a hollow monument, a museum of its own cruelty. In the end, the story of Sparta isn't just about war. It's about obsession. A people so devoted to strength that they sacrificed everything human to achieve it. They succeeded in creating the perfect soldier, and in doing so, erased themselves. The machine that built heroes eventually consumed its creators, leaving behind only ruins, legends, and a whisper that perfection, when taken too far, becomes its own destruction.